Hello and welcome back after the summer holidays to the SANHS webinars. My name's Lizzie Induni and I'm the chair of SANHS. In tonight's webinar, Kat Lodge will be taking us on a tour of some of the places in the National Trust care across the historic county of Somerset. And she's going to share some of the projects she's working on, as well as some of the lesser known archaeological secrets of some familiar places. Kat is the regional archaeologist for the National Trust, a role she's held since October 2023. Prior to this, she was principal archaeologist for the North Somerset Council, and she was there for just over 7 years. As usual, Kat will take questions at the end of the talk. To ask questions, you'll need to activate the chat button at the bottom of the page and type in a question. Because this lecture is going to be recorded for YouTube, we won't read out names in the question time. It's free to register for the talks, but a donation of £5 towards the ongoing costs of SANHS would be greatly appreciated. The donations button is on the SANHS webpage donations page. To make things easier, a link to the donations page will also be posted on the chat button at the end of the lecture. So, over to Kat.
Hi Lizzie, thank you very much for the introduction. I will just share my screen. Bear with me 2 seconds. There we go, it works. So thank you very much for inviting me to speak this evening. As Lizzie said, I am a regional archaeologist with the National Trust. There are around 20 of us across the whole of the Trust, and I'm based in the southwest, and I am based just west of Bristol. I'm also a member of SANHS, so this is quite nice to be able to be doing this kind of with both hats on this evening. I support the Society through volunteering on the Archaeology Committee as the administrator of the Heritage Grants Committee, and I also contribute to all the social media and help with sort of marketing and publicity of events. So as I said, I'm very happy here to be giving this talk this evening. Before I start, I have to say that given the limited time I have this evening, I'm only going to focus on a few key sites and projects, and I'm not even going to talk about the site that's in this picture. Sorry to disappoint. So it's going to move forwards. So as I said, I cover around a third of the southwest of England. There are 2 other regional archaeologists and then 2 archaeologists based on property at the Stonehenge and Avebury World Heritage Site. Our regions are broken up into portfolios, and this is the apologies for the very scruffy drawing of the area that I cover, but these are the various portfolios that I cover, and portfolios are groups of properties which comprise houses, parkland, countryside and coastal sites, or a mix of all of those, and they're usually combined geographically. And I cover a total of 11 portfolios, from Hartland Point in northwest Devon to properties in Chipping Campden in Gloucestershire. And in terms of the 4 portfolios within the historic county of Somerset, it's Bristol and Tintsfield, Somerset Coast and Countryside, South Somerset and Dunster. And it is not in any shape an exaggeration to say that every single day of my job is different. And I really do appreciate how lucky I am to be doing a job that I love. I get to work in beautiful places, as you can see from some of the pictures here, and with really amazing people. And as an archaeologist working for the National Trust, I sit in a multidisciplinary team made up of a range of roles, including nature conservation, trees and woodland advisors, building surveyors, land use and farming advisors, and curators and collections teams. And the area that I cover means that I get to work with a huge range of people, not just with those sort of consultancy colleagues, but property teams, countryside teams, and supporting our sort of visitor experience to engage existing and new audiences with various programming and offers at our places. And my role really is to support the large, the small and the everyday projects that happen at our places, and really to provide advice on the potential impacts on archaeology and the historic environment, but also to shine a light where there are real opportunities to better embed archaeology and the historic environment, and using it to drive positive change, as well as sort of updating and enhancing our National Trust record of the historic environment. So that's not a statutory historic environment that that local authorities hold, but we do record information for similar purposes. And it's also part of my job to help improve awareness and understanding of the archaeology at our places, and help tell the stories, the deeper stories. It's not just impressive country houses, although we do look after those, and beautiful gardens. It's everything that surrounds them and what came before. And as a charity, we care for over 250,000 hectares of land across England, Wales and Northern Ireland. And as I said, it includes countryside and coastal areas, some of which, especially in the southwest, I am biased, include some of the most important archaeological sites in the country. And those sites contain stories of tens of thousands of years of human activity. And why are we doing all of this? Well, earlier this year, we launched our new strategy, coinciding with celebrating the Trust's 130th birthday. And in each chapter of the charity's history, it's adapted to the needs of the day. And our new vision aims to take us into the future. At its core, the strategy has three quite ambitious goals for 2050 that we're starting to work on over the next decade. So the first one is to restore nature. And this isn't just on National Trust land, but everywhere, looking to help influence and inspiring society, the wider society, to care more for a climate positive future. Ending unequal access to nature, beauty and history. So working with a huge range of people, not just to ensure that they have the ability to visit our places, but also just to engage more widely. And then inspiring more people to take care and take action. And that's for, nature, beauty and history. So I'm going to start with the first strand, restore nature, and talk a little bit about the work that I've been involved with at the Honeycutt Estate, and how we're ensuring that the historic environment is a key thread in land use change for nature, but also for people. And some of the work that we're doing across the 250,000 hectares of land that we care for includes tree planting and habitat creation, river restoration and re-wetting, peatland and salt marsh restoration, and in general, land use change in a positive manner for nature and for people. So after that sort of introduction, you'll be very pleased to know that I'm going to share the first of the projects this evening with some exciting results from an archaeological perspective. So we're heading to the Honeycutt Estate in Exmoor, which covers around 20 square miles. The estate comprises 14 different farms, some of which are tenanted and some of which are managed in hand. And I should probably note that at this point that over half of the land that we care for as the National Trust is cared for by tenant farmers. And across the estate, there's also 175 residential properties and various bits of holiday accommodation. But the estate also has over 1,100 recorded sites of archaeological and historic interest, and there are 40 scheduled monuments, which I think really reflects the importance of the historic environment, but also the level of preservation, particularly with prehistoric sites. And the image here that I'm sharing is of two very well preserved early Bronze Age to late Iron Age hill slope enclosures, and they're located on the lower slopes of Dunkery Hill. And that image is taken from Historic England's Aerial Photo Explorer, which is free for anybody to engage with online. First, I will get there, I promise. I'm just going to quickly discuss the work that I've been involved with at Honeycutt on their landscape recovery scheme. So a landscape recovery scheme is funded by DEFRA and through private finance. And the aim really is to deliver significant change across 5,000 hectares of National Trust land and adjoining land. So that's owned by the Exmoor National Park Authority and a private landowner. And the long-term vision across the estate and on the adjoining land is to work with natural processes to develop nature-rich, fully functioning river corridors throughout the estate. And we're doing this in partnership with our tenant farmers, with stakeholders, the local community, and we're exploring ways to deliver long-term, large-scale land use change. So the Honeycutt project team, they're just coming to the end of a 2-year project development phase. and they'll be moving into the 20-year implementation stage in the coming months. So the project development phase has required quite a lot of work, engaging lots and lots of people in understanding the existing condition of the landscape from an ecological and hydrological perspective, but also from an archaeological perspective. And pulling all of that information together, we're working to decide, you know, the best course of action for nature recovery that benefits everyone. And as part of that work, the board who decide who moves into this implementation stage require an assessment of the impact on heritage and the historic environment. So I've been working with Hannah Fluck, who is our senior national archaeologist, to develop an approach not just to assess the impact, but also, and possibly even more importantly, as far as we're concerned, identifying opportunities that the historic environment actually affords. So how we can help influence what changes might be proposed. For example, through archaeological investigation, we can discover lost landscapes and habitats and use that information to help communicate change in that landscape over time. So we've developed a heritage impact and opportunity scoping assessment, which is quite a mouthful, or HIOSA for short. And at Honeycutt, we've been working with Wessex Archaeology to explore these opportunities and also identify where significant archaeology needs to be preserved, so that we can do the best for nature, for people and heritage. So I'm finally getting to the exciting bit. When a peat bog dries out, it starts to release carbon into the atmosphere. But when a peat bog is wet and rich with moss, it becomes an excellent trapper of carbon and invariably a valuable tool in our fight against climate change. And bogs and healthy peatlands can obviously attract a range of unique and fascinating wildlife and plants, but our peatlands are also part of our biocultural heritage and contain really valuable information about past human activities and environments. And I'm sure you're all aware, you know, peat's also incredible at preserving organic evidence, such as plant remains, animal remains, and textiles that aren't preserved in other, in different conditions. So as part of the South West Peatland Partnership, which is funded for Nature for Climate, the team at Honeycutt embarked on a year-long project restoring this peatland, which included creating leaky log dams and deep trench building, aimed to slow the flow of water through the valley, but also to improve water quality. And the higher, more stable water table within the peat will also help to reduce carbon emissions, increase the resilience of the landscape to climate change, and also, importantly, just as importantly, preserve archaeology. So in order to explore whether evidence of past human activity was present at the site of this restoration work, archaeological and paleo-environmental monitoring was undertaken in the form of an intermittent watching brief. And in addition, samples were taken at 5 centimetre intervals to create a 1.5 metre deep sequence of peat, which was then taken to a specialist lab to be analysed. And all of this work was undertaken by Wessex Archaeology. And what was found, amazingly, was the remains of a prehistoric woodland floor. And this comprised fragments of trunks, small branches and twigs. And further analysis has identified that these date from around 4.5 to 3,500 years ago, so during the late Neolithic and Middle Bronze Age. And these fragments have revealed the presence of tree species, including alder and willow, and seeds nearby have shown that there was also birch growing in this landscape. And really excitingly, a segment of willow tree was also found, which dates to the beginning of the Neolithic. Wow. And plant remains have also been recovered from the peat, which indicate that sedges and rushes were growing within this wet woodland habitat. And there was also evidence of oak within the surrounding landscape as well. And the discoveries also included over 100 fragments of Hydrana riparia beetles. So they're a semi-aquatic beetle that flourishes in damp conditions, and they still exist today. Plus, there were prehistoric samples of dung beetles, rove beetles, moss mites, and water scavenger beetles. And so this shows us that the landscape we see today, and the fact that we typically associate Exmoor as being moorland, clue is in the name. This hasn't always been the case. So this allows us opportunities to explore the reintroductions of some of these habitats in the future. I'm not saying that's the case here, but for other places, certainly that might be an opportunity. The archaeological evidence is there to support that. And then these images show the after. So we've got some of the leaky log dams on the left, and on the right is an area of wet bog, which holds that water back and slows the flow of water down through the valley. So now I'm going to jump to Barrington Court, not too far from Yeovil. This is actually quite an important site because Canon Hardwicke Rawnsley, who was one of the 3 National Trust founders, he visited Barrington Court in the 1890s and championed its acquisition. It was bought by Julia Woodward of Clevedon, and she gifted it to the National Trust in 1907. And it wasn't just one of the Trust's earliest acquisitions, it was actually its first country house, and not a lot of people know that. But with no endowment and a huge amount of restoration needed, Barrington Court was a challenging property, especially during the economic downturn after the First World War. But a solution came in the form of Lieutenant Colonel Abram Lyle, also known as Arthur. He was a grandson of the sugar refiner Abram Lyle and director of the company that later merged, becoming Tate and Lyle. The courthouse, unfortunately, was in a ruinous condition when Lyle acquired it. It was only partially roofed. Few of the interiors survived, and it's actually on record that the attics were full of owls. So together, Lyle and his architect, J. Edwin Forbes, completely reimagined Barrington, and using Lyle's quite extensive collection of architectural salvage, which included lots and lots of wood panelling, and Forbes' new designs, the house and gardens were transformed. And we're really lucky because Forbes recorded all aspects of the restoration in a diary, and this is held in the Somerset archives. I'm not going to read it all out, but it's an account of the restoration of Barrington Court and then all of the various buildings and garden features and landscape features, which took place between the years 1919 and 1925. And Forbes records some interesting discoveries during the restoration. For example, between July and October 1920, some Roman tiles buried beneath the ground near the south ditch east of the court. In February 1921, he records that the Reverend Prebendary Hawley, who was the vicar of Barrington at the time, and Harold St George Gray, who was curator of Taunton Museum, excavated in Aller Grove, and this is just off National Trust land to the southwest of Barrington Court. And he says that they excavated the site of an old Roman ash pit where they found human bones, specimens of pottery which were rimmed and thumb marked, and a Roman tile. And he noted that these are in the Taunton Museum. And he also mentioned that in July 1920, the water supply for Barrington Court came from an old Roman well called Silver Well, which was situated in Aller Grove. And then another one of his accounts here, in spring 1925, remnants of old walls on the south front and running at right angles to it, which were possibly enclosing a forecourt which was made of small local stones. The latter was exposed while levelling on the south side of the court. And then this last bit is like, if anybody can help me with this, please do. Also portions of a carved stone something screen. I haven't quite been able to work that out. And these are some of the finds. So these are in the Somerset Heritage Centre, and they've been lovingly photographed, so I could include them in an exhibition at Barrington earlier this year, but also thankfully to include in my talk tonight. So we've got various bits of animal bone, we've got a lovely dog jaw there, a whetstone, bits and pieces of Roman pottery, and quite a lot of a single jug as well. And in 1913, they excavated in Aller Grove, and Harold St George Gray excavated a T-shaped trench. It was about 115 feet from the eastern edge of the field, and they recovered 123 pottery fragments, which comprised 64 side pieces of vessels, 44 rim sherds, 14 sections of bases, and one handle. And he described them as mostly ordinary blackware with some domestic ware. And I thought it would be good to just include this sort of map, which has taken information from the Somerset Historic Environment Record, just to kind of put Barrington and the site at Allargrove in its wider context in terms of Roman or Romano-British activity. And you can see the big red line there at the bottom of the screen. That's the route of the Fossway. And then you've got various sort of Roman burial sites, enclosures, villas, and then ad hoc coin finds as well. And this map shows the various archaeological interventions that have been taken across the Barrington estate in the last 25 years or so. So they ranged from watching briefs and evaluation trenches for the installation of pipes, cables, and the car park, as well as a range of geophysical and earthwork surveys. And then this is the 2006 earthwork survey that was undertaken by English Heritage, as it was then known. And interestingly, if you look at the northeastern corner, so just to the northeast of the court, which is at the top of the map, you'll notice quite a lot of earthworks on various alignments. It's posited that these might relate to various phases of garden design, but there's also the possibility that some might relate to the medieval manorial complex. So we know from documentary sources that the complex included a demesne court by 1235. We have that documented. And we know from the same sources that it lay to the north and the east of the present courthouse. By the late 14th century, the house included not only a hall, but a two-story solar wing to the east. And there was also a new addition on the north side, along with a garden, extensive farm buildings, a chapel, and a fishery in the ditches, the moat around the court. So in the year 2000, there was a new water pipe being put through the South Lawn. So my predecessor, Martin Papworth, was undertaking archaeological monitoring of this. And at the southern end of this trench, there was a small pit with some charcoal and ash, which overlay a layer of ham stone. And finds included oyster shell, animal bone, and pottery, all of which were kind of typical of a 17th century date. And tying in nicely with what Forbes mentioned, the architect in the 1920s, the lawn was deliberately levelled. So whether it was the back full of these 17th century finds, we're not 100% sure. But what Martin did also come across was this lovely layer of ham stone. So there were dressed blocks up to 3/4 high, but for most of the length of this wall, there were it was only a single course, but hopefully you can just see in that trench that there's a lovely layer of flagstone floor of ham stone. So off the back of that watching brief, Martin undertook a resistivity survey of part of the South Lawn, just to see if there might be any other walls or any other floor surfaces, and these are the results. So the 1920s water pipe that ran from the spring in Allargrove, which was where the Roman settlement was, and the 2000 water pipe show up clearly, but there were a huge amount of high resistance features which very likely relate to walls or spreads of rubble, possibly even more floor surfaces. And it's not obvious, I probably should have drawn some lines on this, but take a closer look at the alignment of these features to the present courthouse. They don't quite match up. A century or so of weather has really taken its toll on Courthouse and Strode House, which is the brick building to the side, which was the former stable block. So water ingress has happened, unfortunately, and it's causing quite a bit of damage to the historic fabric of these buildings. So a large conservation project started in early 2020, which was paused due to the pandemic, but restarted in the summer of 2022. And this Barrington Court Revival project is essentially working to understand the condition of the buildings and the best approach to their repair. And it's a multi-million-pound project, and it will take several years of planning and restoration. But as part of this project, we're also working to sort of better understand the wider historic and archaeological context of the court and its landscape. So we've been undertaking some ground penetrating radar surveys and expanding on the work that Martin undertook in the early 2000s. So we've surveyed a decent proportion of the South Lawn now, with some interesting results. This was the first survey that we surveyed in early July of this year, and these are the results. So you can see at the top there that the path is showing up very clearly. So that's the sort of brick path that runs in front of the courthouse. And then the dark area in the middle of the grid, it's quite a large spread of potential rubble or maybe even walls or floor surfaces. And it links up very nicely with what showed up on Martin's survey. So we know that things are working in terms of our new ground penetrating radar kit. We also did another section around the sundial. So this was completed. We did this as part of the Festival of Archaeology at the end of July. And you can see that we've picked up the 2000 water pipe trench. We've also got the path and the sundial. And then there's a linear feature that matches up with sort of the bottom end of what Martin picked up. But that spread of features highlighted in the red sort of oval there, they weren't picked up, and they're on a different alignment again. So that's interesting. We also squeezed in another small area when we were doing our work during the Festival of Archaeology, just to see if there might be any sort of formal garden features or anything really that shows up in the kind of the forecourt of the court. And we've got quite a bit going on. So there are some blocked up doorways either side of the court on each of the wings. And as we were doing the survey, it was coming up quite nicely that there was possibly a path or a floor surface being picked up on the same alignment as of one of these blocked up doors. But I've still got a fair bit of processing to do with this data, and then I need to write a report. And I will preempt this question now. Are we going to take a look at this further and actually work out what these features might have been? Well, I'm in conversations with the property team, and we're talking about potentially doing a small excavation for next year's Festival of Archaeology. So do watch this space. I'm going to stay in South Somerset and just head up the road from Barrington to Lights Carey. Lights Carey Manor has been home to two main families, and the Light family lived at Lights Carey Manor for several centuries, as early as 1286. Interestingly, so they were feudal tenants, and the charge for the manor was an annual rent of 10 shillings or the contents of a swan's nest on the River Carey. 6 generations of the Light family lived at the manor, and the building was gradually expanded over time. It's believed that William's grandson commissioned the chapel in 1343. The Great Hall was constructed in around 1460 by Thomas Light, and then the south wing kitchens and outbuildings were added by 1533. I didn't know this until I started working for the National Trust, and this came into my sort of patch. But did you know that the field, as you drive in and head towards the car park, the field on your right is actually the site of a lost settlement known as Tuckers Carey, or Tucks Carey. It's designated a scheduled monument and includes a deserted medieval settlement, associated fields, as defined by a survey in 1980. And you can see from the aerial photograph there some of the layout, and a lot of the features survive as quite well-preserved earthworks. On the northwest of the site are the remains of what was perhaps the former manor of Tuckers Carey, and then there's various buildings within the sort of the hamlet that's left that it kind of looks as though they were all part of this slightly larger or single village. So I love LiDAR. It's one of the best things ever, and it shows this site brilliantly. This is Environment Agency LiDAR imagery from 2022. So this is at 1 metre resolution, and you can quite clearly see some of the earthworks, which now consist of grassed over banks. The banks range from anything from kind of 20 centimetres to 70 centimetres high, and they form a complex of square or rectangular fields, paddocks and closes, and then they're fed by a complex of hollowed tracks and wider ways. And then there's a number of building platforms. They are visible on the ground, and more so obviously on aerial photographs and LiDAR. This is the results of the earthwork survey undertaken in 1980, and you can, again, I mean, this shows it up even more clearly, and it helps that the blocks have been identified. And unfortunately, in the northwest corner, quarrying and enclosure of smaller parcels has somewhat made the interpretation quite difficult. But it does give us, a decent insight into how people were using this land at that point in time. And to gain a bit more information in terms of what might not be visible above the ground, a geophysical survey was commissioned in 2009, and this was undertaken by the South Somerset Archaeological Research Group, and it has definitely enhanced our understanding of the site. Now, if you can see the sort of the purple semicircular, almost circular feature, I'm assuming that many people's eyes will be drawn to that. It's a tree planted knoll, and there's literary evidence from the Commonplace Book of Thomas Light in 1610, that suggests that this was the site of Tuck's Carey Manor. Unfortunately, there's a large amount of modern kind of metallic interference, so the results weren't particularly conclusive. But when you actually go and have a look at that feature, there are bits of broken stone. So that's quite interesting. The survey's also shown us that there are 3 different phases of activity. So if you look at the sort of the green and orange features, they're pretty much on a east-west, north-south alignment. But the ones that I've highlighted here lie on a different alignment and appear to overlie the earlier activity. And then we've also got another phase of activity, which is on a completely different alignment. One of the frustrating things, I think, is that there is very little documentary evidence to support the development and the subsequent abandonment of Tucker's Carey village. So that's another possibility for a little investigation in the future. And this is what you see if you visit today. So this is stood kind of behind Lights Carey Manor, looking out towards the River Carey. And you wouldn't necessarily know that there is a deserted medieval village lying under here. So I'm working with the property team and an archaeological illustrator to bring it to life. And we're going to be installing an information board here with the information that we do know. And as I say, kind of watch this space in terms of what we might do in the future. Another property where I've been undertaking some field work is Dunster Castle. I'm sure everybody knows that what you see today isn't the original castle. It's very much a Victorian representation, the result of significant enlarging and remodelling. But Dunster does have origins as a castle dating back at least 1,000 years. And Dunster's actually documented in Domesday in 1086. It was under the land of William de Mohun, or William of Mohun. And the extract in Domesday translates to, "He holds Dunster himself. His castle is there. Alfric held it before 1066, sorry." I'm not going to read out the rest of it, but it's all the important financial information. And William de Mohun was one of William the Conqueror's chief supporters. He was granted 69 manors in the southwest of England, but he chose Dunster to be the seat of his administration. So Dunster was constructed by adapting a naturally strongly defensive and strategically placed position on high ground above the floodplain. The medieval motte and bailey is now quite, largely obscured by 17th, 18th and 19th century landscaping and planting schemes. But from the LiDAR imagery here, you can quite clearly see the sort of the motte and the bailey on the top of this outcrop. The motte was also used as a bowling green. So 1920, it became a bowling green, and it's also the site of a reservoir. And the lower slopes have also been heavily landscaped at various points in the past. So this is a lovely artist's impression of how Dunster may have looked in the 12th century. You can see the motte with its stone defences, and obviously would have been probably wooden originally. And then significant construction was carried out in the 13th and 14th centuries, and some fragments of this period actually survive. In 1378, Lady Joan de Mohun, she sold the property to Lady Elizabeth Luttrell, who was the wife of Sir Andrew Luttrell of East Quantock's Head. And her son, Sir Hugh, took possession of the castle in 1405. So the masonry of the Norman castle, or sort of 12th, 13th century, certainly at foundation level, has either been incorporated or completely buried beneath later works, including a gatehouse which was erected by Sir Hugh in 1420. And so this image is a kind of interpretation of how it may have looked in the 15th century. And this is the remains of the Bastion Tower. It's one of my favourite parts of the site. And then, so these are images from the 1860s. So this is around the time that the castle was being significantly enlarged and altered. The one on the left is the approach to the castle, up Castle Hill through the gatehouse, and then the one on the left is from the same period, showing the top half of the gatehouse, or Tenants' Hall as it's known. And these are images from recent years. So this is looking the opposite way through the gatehouse, and then Tenants' Hall again. So Tenants' Hall, I should say, you know, working for the National Trust, this is where you'll find the cafe and your opportunity to get a famous National Trust scone, or infamous. And then this final image is how the castle would have looked potentially around 1617. So the castle was garrisoned for Parliament in 1642 at the outset of the Civil War, and after a brief period of royalist occupation, it was held once again for Parliament. Extensive demolition took place around 1650 in order to prevent the castle being utilised in any royalist uprising, and it was this point that much of the 13th century curtain walling above ground level was lost. I'm not going to talk any more about the Civil War, but if you're interested, I definitely recommend visiting and finding out more from some of our very, very knowledgeable volunteer guides on a medieval tour. And so in 1764, the lower ward was actually raised considerably. So this is where a lot of the work in terms of landscaping the motte happened. And in the late 1860s and early 1870s, Anthony Salvin was commissioned by George Luttrell to completely redesign the castle and create a comfortable Victorian home. So he altered the building's exterior, he demolished the chapel on the south front, he built 2 new towers, and then built all the battlements to emphasise the castle's medieval origins. So this is a photograph of the top of the gatehouse, Tenants' Hall, during Salvin's work. And this is a map of the site today. So you can still see the motte, but obviously it's considerably altered from what it would have been 1,000 years ago. And just a lovely picture of Dunster Castle, you know, the kind of the medieval-esque Victorian family home with the brilliant Luttrell coat of arms above the door. And in 1990, the Dorset Institute Archaeological Unit were employed to do a bit of an investigation on the Bailey. So we don't know if everything was completely trashed during Salvin's work, or if some archaeological remains dating to the sort of the Norman and earlier medieval period actually survive. So there were 2 areas of resistivity undertaken, which are shown here. And these are the results. So there are several features. These yellow blobs relate potentially to earlier phases of the castle within the Bailey. They've been interpreted as stone or rubble foundations, which might relate to the curtain wall or tower. There could be a subdivision within the Bailey, or the remains of a building or multiple buildings within the Bailey. So I've been undertaking some ground penetrating radar at Dunster. We're loving our new kit, and I'm currently processing the results before writing up the report. But some initial results have shown that we've picked up some additional features to what were identified in this resistivity survey. So again, kind of watch this space, but this is a site that we probably won't be digging up just because it's scheduled, and we'd have to have a very, very, we'd have to have very good justification for sticking a couple of holes through it. So the final secret I'm going to share is right in the north of this historic county. This is on the edge of the Avon Gorge, southwest of Bristol. And Stokely Camp is actually shown in this image, although you wouldn't know it when the vegetation is slightly high. It's a promontory fort dating to the Iron Age. And as I say, many visitors, until they get right up to it, and even then, not really sure, that there's a hill fort hiding in the woodlands. So I thought this would be a nice one to share. And this is what's hiding. Again, this is 2022 LiDAR imagery at 1 metre resolution. So you can see the Avon Gorge on the right-hand side, and the use of the natural defences of its sort of cliff top position, and then the impressive banks and ditches on its western extent. So the rampart is made of earth and stone. It's a limestone outcrop, so they're using the limestone that is freely available, and they've constructed the rampart across a spur to divide it from the surrounding land. This is an 1802 illustration, and we think this is possibly the earliest survey of the site, but if anybody knows any different, please do let me know. And then we've got this lovely 1966 survey by J.W. Haldane, which provides a little bit more detail on the fort's construction. This report was published in the Proceedings of the University of Bristol Speleological Society, so do hunt that out for yourself. That's freely available online. And Haldane put 2 sections across the ramparts, and obviously did the kind of the earthwork survey as well. And he said, the level of defence varies from a double rampart in the northwest to a single rampart in the south. The double rampart is substantial. The inner bank is 4.5 metres high with an accompanying ditch 1 metre deep, giving a total width of 30 metres. The outer bank is 2.5 metres high and the ditch 1 metre deep, giving a total width of 25 metres. So at the widest point, these sort of 2 complexes of banks and ditches measure approximately 55 metres across. And Haldane also produced some lovely section drawings of the ramparts. So the construction utilises the natural limestone bedrock, but there would have also been dry stone walls built on top of these banks, and some of these sections are just about visible when the vegetation is very low or has been cut right back or grazed. It wasn't proven by Haldane that the dry stone walls were contemporary, but there are other local sites like Dolbury Warren on the edge of the Mendip Hills, and Worlbury Camp, which is just on the edge of Weston-super-Mare. Both of those sites have clear evidence of dry stone wall defences, so it's not really a stretch to say it would have been possible here. And this is a lovely photo from Haldane's excavations, which show the west face of one of these walls. Some of the sections were cleared by Lloyd Morgan in 1900. I'm still to find a kind of proper reference to that. So again, if anybody's got any intel, please do let me know. And then Haldane uncovered them again in the 1960s. Some of these walls are up to 1.5 meters thick. And unfortunately, Haldane didn't recover much in the way of datable finds during his investigations, but in his report he notes, it is thus impossible to assign this camp's construction to a period any more accurate than the latter half of the Iron Age, and it may have been inhabited, however, as late as the Romano-British period. And this is all the more impressive because it's not the only hill fort here. It formed a part of a group of 3 sites which defended the Avon Gorge. So you've got Clifton Camp on the other side of the gorge where the observatory is located, and then Burwall's Camp, which unfortunately was largely destroyed when a large villa was constructed. And similarly, at both of these sites, dating evidence is or was very scarce, but it's likely they were contemporary. And there have been Roman coins found at or close to each of these sites, which suggests the potential reuse during the Roman period, which again makes sense, especially given the proximity to the important port at Bunai, sea mills, and the walled Roman town at Gatcombe, just to the west of Long Ashton. And to reflect the findings of these Roman coins close to the site, this carved tree trunk includes a section on the history of one of these coins. So this says, Gallienus was Roman emperor from AD 253 until 268, at first jointly with his father. A bronze coin minted during his reign was found here at Stokely Camp. A ruthless man, he oversaw an empire in decline. Runaway inflation meant that money was devalued, with cheaper metal coins often being coated with silver to imitate genuine silver coins. So that concludes my my very quick foray into some of the archaeological secrets of the National Trust in Somerset. I've just got a couple more slides of some information that I'd like to share. So I mentioned the Festival of Archaeology earlier. I'm sure you're all aware of it. It's run by the Council for British Archaeology, and the National Trust has been collaborating with them for a number of years. It's just, for us, it's just such an amazing opportunity to really showcase archaeology at the places we care for. And more places are signing up each year, which is really great. Some are just kind of doing a little bit for the first time and sort of seeing what the appetite is. Others go all out. So this summer we had events in our Somerset properties, ranging from guided walks. We had heritage spotter trails where we sort of identified 6 locations within our estates or parks and gardens that you wouldn't necessarily know there was any archaeology, for example. And we had medieval tours, archaeological surveys, exhibitions showing some of the hidden corners of our well-known houses. And I did 2 days at Dunster, as I said, doing GPR surveys, and a day at Barrington doing the same. I also helped run events across the rest of my patch across the 2 weeks. And last year, for the first time, we ran a lovely event at Breen Down where we set up 6 different activities at key locations like our Roman Temple, the Iron Age Hill Fort, and obviously the Palmerston Fort. And finally, one of the other, I mean, there aren't enough amazing things about my job, but one of the really, really brilliant things about my job is working with groups of amazing volunteers and rangers who are just as passionate about archaeology and heritage. We have a programme called the Heritage and Archaeology Ranger Team, or HART for short. We like an acronym. These teams are based at particular properties or wider portfolios, and they support us in undertaking condition surveys of important archaeological and historical features, not just within gardens and parklands, but the wider landscapes as well. And they're also involved in research projects, in surveys, excavations, when opportunities arise, and just generally help us as archaeologists at the Trust to raise the profile of the awesome archaeology that we are so lucky to look after. And in a nice twist of fate, I was actually one of the first HART volunteers as part of a pilot scheme when I was at university in Worcester at Croom Court. So it's quite lovely to have come full circle. And finally, if you are interested in learning more about places in the care of the National Trust, not just in Somerset, but of course across England, Wales and Northern Ireland. We have a public sort of facing website which pulls out all of the information from our National Trust historic record of the historic environment. It's called Heritage Records Online, and you can explore the almost 100,000 archaeological sites that we have recorded. You will also see a tab there that says volunteer. So if you're interested in helping us care for the historic environment, you're very, very welcome to sign up. I think it's probably time that I stop talking. So thank you very, very much for listening. And I hope you find it interesting.
Thank you very much, Kat. That was really fascinating. And, it really does amaze me what a huge area you have to cover in your job. I mean, it's not kind of local, is it? You're covering quite some distances. I imagine some days you're going sort of almost from the north of your patch to the south of it. That is quite a long way.
I try not to be in the Cotswolds one day and North Devon the next. I do try to manage
Absolutely.
it.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that was really good. I'm particularly interested in the Honeycutt work. I'm hoping that one day some of the SANHS members will be able to go and have a look at some of the work that's being done up there, because I think it is quite spectacular, isn't it?
Something that I can definitely help to arrange. Yes, very happy to do that.
Oh, that's really nice. Well, I hope everybody who's listening will like to come along. Anybody who's listening, please send in some questions, because it's just makes it more interesting, really. And we're very fortunate that Kat's here and she can answer some of them. So, tell me, I was quite worried about all the Victorians digging up bits of Dunster Castle. Were they considerate of any of the archaeology there? What was their sense of history, do you suppose?
That I'm still trying to unravel at the moment. Yeah, I think interestingly, the kind of the addition of battlements and really focusing on the kind of the medieval-esque is really interesting.
Yes.
But there was quite a lot of destruction as well.
Yes.
And I'm yet to find out where certain things may be. So yeah.
Yes. I was just thinking about when they were putting the gardens in. I'm thinking, well, they're digging through all the archaeology.
There is definitely stuff left. So
right.
the steps up to the top of the keep, as it's known at property, they were replaced about 8 or 9 years ago, and there was an archaeological watching brief on those, and there was medieval and post-medieval pottery coming up. So there's still fragments. Yeah. And I'm desperate to do a GPR survey of the keep itself, the bowling green, just to see if there is anything there.
Anything left? Yes. It just makes you wonder about their sense of history, really, is what I always found very interesting. Because historic England wasn't around then to guide people.
No.
We've got a question here about the little village of, is it Tucker's Carey, next to Lights Carey Manor. Does anybody know who Tucker was?
No, interestingly. So it's likely that it was a particular person rather than just referring to a place. So as we're putting together this information board, I'm trying to pull together as much kind of documentary evidence as possible, but it's really quite difficult. So if anybody knows anything about the history of Lights Carey and Tucks Carey, please do get in touch. I will happily share my email address for anybody who wants to get in touch.
Yeah, well, do. I mean, send some questions into the local history committee. They're quite a learned bunch.
Yes, I shall. I'll get you on site.
Okay, another question here. Was Stokely Camp and its 2 neighbouring camps re-inhabited after the Romano period?
Okay, so there are definitely quite a lot of hill forts that were re-inhabited or reused for various purposes in the early medieval period. I'm thinking Cadbury Congsbury, definitely. We know there was early medieval occupation there, with a lovely cemetery. There is no archaeological evidence, but that's not to say there wasn't. It just means that we either haven't found it, or everyone was digging in the wrong place. So.
Yes, I mean, I lived in Bristol. I had no idea that there were hill forts up there at all.
And then the section of Roman Road which I only found about on the Downs a few
Yeah,
years ago.
yeah, absolutely. And I was working in the museum. Yeah, well, I think that's probably coming to the end of our questions, actually. That was really very, very interesting indeed. Thank you ever so much. And yeah, I shall be even more impressed by the amount of work that you seem to churn out, having to do all this for your day job.
Well, it's a pleasure. Like I said, I'm doing a job that I love, so I appreciate how lucky I am.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're lucky to have you as well. Okay, thank you very much, Kat. So we've got a few announcements before the end of the webinar. Most important, the next SANHS webinar, which will be on the 30th of October, when Stephen Miles of Historic England is going to talk about his research on the Kilve oil field. And that's going to be a very interesting lecture indeed. Live events on Saturday coming up. This next Saturday, the 20th, there's a tour of the Cricket Museum in Taunton. If you'd like to go to that, please email the SANHS office. That's office@sanhs.org. We have now Kat's coming on this one as well, because on the 28th of September at 11 o'clock, we're having a tour around Breen Down, where Mr. Chris Webster from Southwest Heritage Trust and Kat, National Trust Archaeologist, are taking us for a guided walk around Breen Down. So do sign up for that. And on the 9th of October, lots of events in SANHS at the moment. There's going to be a walk around Cannington and also a visit to Blackmore Manor. You can find out about all these events on the SANHS website. Also on the 9th of October, it's a busy day. It's Wyndham Hall because we have a film there, The Land Girls, and that was in fact filmed all around Dulverton, so it's almost quite a local film. So that's on the 9th of October at the Wyndham Hall in Taunton. And on the 16th of October, David Nicholson, one of our trustees and ex-MP, is going to talk about his memoirs as a Somerset MP, and that also will be in the Wyndham Hall. So plenty of things going on. They're all on the SANHS website, so do go and have a look at that. Our associated societies are also very busy. This coming month, Martock History Group, Tuesday the 23rd of September, is having a talk on the Battle of Britain over Somerset 85 years ago. Frome Society for Local Study on the 24th of September, an evening lecture on the working class life in the 17th century Somerset. At Tintin Hole Local History Group on the 24th of September, there's going to be a talk on Westmore, and that's by the Kingsbury Time Travellers, always very, very busy. South Petherton, again on the 25th of September, having a talk on the history of Whitehall. And last but not least, Yeovil Archaeology and Local History Society on the 3rd of October have a talk about From Man to Boy to Man in Somerset Coalfields by Bryn Hawkins. So lots going on. It's that time of year when there's a lot of lectures going on. Hope you manage to participate in some. And as I say, do go to the SANHS website if you need to find out more about events. So that only leaves me to thank you for coming, and especially to thank the webinar team and Kat, who have been very busy this evening. And I hope to see you all again soon. Thank you and goodbye.